To this Pearson English webinar. Thank you for joining us today. Please remember this session is recorded and the recording will be made available via our YouTube channel. Also, every participant will receive a certificate of attendance. During the session, please submit any questions you have in the chat box and we will answer these at the end. I'm excited to hand over to Eleonora, who's going to talk about getting close-up insights even from a distance. Over to you, Ellie.
Thank you very much and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on the parts of the world you're joining from. My name is Eleonora, I go by Ellie, and I'm a product manager with the Pearson English assessment team. Which basically means that I work on the design of assessments that can help you get insights on students' learning and on their progress and on their level of proficiency. And this is exactly the topic of today's session. But just before that, a couple of housekeepings. As Charlie said, the webinar is recorded. You will get a certificate within 2 weeks, as well as a link to the recording and a virtual goodie bag. So let me come to the topic of today, which, as I was mentioning, is using assessments, and in particular focusing on digital assessments to get up-close insights on students' learning. And I'm focusing on digital assessment because I'm guessing that these are becoming even more needed and topical in today's context of remote teaching or hybrid teaching. So I want to talk to you about 2 specific products that we designed at Pearson. And I also want to close off the session with some tips and advice of things that you should be taking into account when dealing with remote assessment. So that's the plan for today, but I do want to start with learning a little bit about you. And I've prepared 3 questions I would like to hear about. I'm going to read out the 3 questions, and then Charlie is going to launch the poll as a survey. So the first thing that I want to learn about is who are you students, so that I get a sense of whether you're teaching young learners or adults and so on. In the next question, I would like to know what you're currently using or what you're typically using to assess learners, because let me say, there is not one right formula. A lot depends on your learners and your teaching styles. And I've heard many different things. I was a teacher myself, and I would never stuck to one single type. So you could be using unit tests. Sometimes you could just assess learners through observation and so on. So I do want to hear what you are using, and you can select all that applies. And the last question I want to get your feedback on is, what is your biggest challenge when assessing learners? And again, this is a collection of things that I've heard from teachers in my research, and it can come from, creating tests to marking, which is often quoted as a very time-consuming task, or even sometimes teachers are wondering about having an objective and accurate measure. So this is what I want to hear about, and I'm passing it over to Charlie to launch the polls. Thank you, Charlie. So you should see the 3 questions on screen now, and we'll give you a minute or so just to answer that.
Yeah, we're getting them, getting the results through now, so that's coming through clearly.
And yes, you can select all that apply to your context. I just saw a question.
Yeah, all 3 of them are multiple choice.
how are we going with
Yeah, we've got pretty
results?
good results now. We're just at just under 50%. But shall we share the results?
Maybe let's give it another few
Yeah, we're
seconds.
still getting
I'm
some
reading
answers.
some of the comments. Teachers are
Yeah,
using projects. Yes, that's one I've forgotten. True. Um, yeah, Kahoot. Yes, I've heard it a lot as well. Yeah, let's see how the results are. Charlie,
there you go.
thanks.
You should see them now.
Yeah, excellent. So let me see who is in the audience. And I see a fairly homogeneous spread across all the ages, with the majority of teachers being in the teens area. Okay, so I shall keep that in mind if there are specific considerations. When it comes to how you typically assess learners, yes, I was expecting a pretty equal spread of the top three. And let me tell you, what my session is going to focus on is on two products that have been designed around proficiency assessment, digital products that help you with that. And let me come to the last question, where I've asked you about biggest challenges. Have less opportunity to assess monitor students with remote teaching? Yes, absolutely. That's something that we are all dealing with right now. Speaking effectively, spend a lot of time. And let me tell you, with my session, I hope I'll give you a taste of two digital assessments that can definitely help you with saving time in creating tests and marking tests, um, but also that can help you give evidence of progress to your external stakeholders, be it your supervisor or a parent. So thank you so much for your input to start with. And let me jump back to the presentation and come back to the main theme of the presentation, which, as I said, is using assessment to get insights into learners' progress and learners' learning. So when I think about assessment, my mind immediately goes to the idea of having some kind of a measurement tool. So it could be a scale or could be a point of reference to base my assessment on. And let me say that measurement, traditionally, or depending on how what context, what scenario you're in, measurement could be something as simple as describing your learner's proficiency as elementary, intermediate, or advanced. I've been a teacher myself, and I've used these descriptive terms just to give an overall description of learner's ability. The issue with such terms is that you'll all agree they're quite wide and quite subjective, which is why I think a very common standard that is embraced by the ELT community around the world is the Common European Framework, which was developed in the 90s to really bring that common understanding around learners' ability and what was meant with these very broad terms. And I think we can all agree that it was enormously helpful, and it has become a standard, as I said, for the ELT world. And talking about measurement tools, here at Pearson, we have developed the Global Scale of English, which we also refer to as the GSE, which essentially has taken the Common European Framework and the original underlying data and has crunched up the number in a different way in order to get to a much more granular scale, where you can immediately see from this image that I'm showing that the full scale is divided into 90 points on the GSE scale. And the main objective was really to provide a little bit more detail into the bands of the Common European Framework. And as you can see, every band in the Common European Framework equals to 6 to 8 points of the GSE scales. And why did we do this? Well, one of the reasons why we wanted to move to a more granular scale was to really motivate learners by showing that progress is made, even if it's not enough progress to move from one level of a Sefer to the next. So in this slide, I'm showing you the number of hours that it would take to move from an A2 level to an A1 level, to an A2 level, and then the number of hours that it would take to move from B1 to B2. And as we all know, different learners learn at different speed, at a different pace. So this is what I wanted to show you here with the image of a speedy snail and an image of, which really refers to fast learners, and an image of a slow snail, so to speak, which would really be a way to refer to slower learners, or learners that are getting less hour of instruction. And even in the case of a fast learner, you see that it's still a lot of hours to move from one band of a GSE to the next. And it could equal to a full year of instruction. And in the next slide, let me show you, I've added the same information, but I've referred back to the GSE. And what I'm showing you now is the time that it would take to learners to move up 3 points on the GSE scale. So why 3 points? 3 points is what we decided we deemed to be the smallest unit of accurate measurement on the GSE. So basically, it's the smallest step of progress where you can be sure that the change is definitely not within the margin of error. So speaking about our assessment are measuring your proficiency against the GSE. And if there is at least a 3-point change on the GSE, we can guarantee that progress is made. And it's not just a matter of a student having a better day or a worse day. And let's coming back to why this is helpful. I think it is enormously helpful to us as developers of teaching and learning material, but also to teachers, because it really gives you increased visibility into students' ability, and it helps us and teachers to monitor progress closely with our assessment, and also make informed decision about teaching and learning goals. The last thing that I'm going to tell you about the GSE is that really similarly to the Common European Framework, what underpins the GSE are sets of learning objectives, so can-do statements that are describing learners' ability. And we have 4 different sets of learning objectives to take into account the different groups of learners. And specifically, we also have a set of young learners' objectives that are taking into account the cognitive development that young learners go through the primary years. And let me say that the GSE is really at the heart of everything we do here at Pearson, and really helps us bringing our assessment products and our courses together and make sure that they work well together. And I'll give you some examples as I'm showing you the 2 tests that I will be talking about. So let's come to that. I want to now move on to the two tests that I told you at the beginning. And these are two tests that have been designed to really get insights in your students' learning. And I want to start considering when you need to get students, learners' insights. So I'm simplifying a lot here, but what I'm showing you on screen now is what I call a typical learner journey. So I almost sometimes I describe it as a visual representation of the macro jobs that a teacher has to fulfill when they're doing the one job of teaching, which I'm sure you'll agree it's never just one single job. It really encapsulate many different tasks and many different roles. So at the start of the learner journey here, I've got the job of placing students, of streaming students into the correct level, which potentially it relates more to private language schools or universities, but it is important at the start of a year or at the start of an academic cycle to really have a close understanding of your learners' abilities at the start. Then any learning cycle would move to uh, probably the most visible job of teachers, which is giving instructions, but also providing opportunities for learners to learn, consolidate, and become confident with the language. And this job of teaching, what I'm calling the job of teaching, is very intrinsically connected to the job of monitoring progress, because that's exactly what we all do as teachers. As we are teaching students, we really need to make sure that everyone is learning and is making progress and and we are bringing them along within our journey. And the tests that I will be presenting you shortly are two tests that are designed to really help you at the stage of placing learners. So this is the test that we call the level test. And then we have a benchmark test, which is a test that is designed to be taken at regular intervals during the education cycle. And has been designed to really help you monitor progress closely and help you tailor your instruction to your students' needs. So let's start with the level test, the test that you would use to place your students. And let me just give you a summary of all the challenges, all the feedback that I collected from teachers like yourself, and that really informed the design of this test and informed the things that we wanted to solve through the design of this test. So when it comes to placing learners, I think one key issue is around objectivity. So two teachers may have different views on learners' proficiency. So how can we get a standardized objective measure? From the point of view of learners, I think the issue of objectivity is evident when learners either overestimate or underestimate their proficiency. But also, it is visible in the fact that learners of the same age may have very different levels of proficiency depending on the schools and the type of instructions they gotten. And even thinking about a case of a single student, one learner may be stronger in some skills, for example, in reading and writing, but maybe a lot weaker in speaking and listening. And this is an issue that traditional placement tests often missed. And the last challenge, the last issues that we took into account is that traditional placement tests were often paper-based, which is obviously a challenge when the instruction is delivered online. Like I'm guessing it's happening for a lot of you right now. So here is the level test, and the key objective of the level test is really to give you an accurate overview of your learner's level and your learner's ability. It is a quick test, and it is a digital test that is powered by artificial intelligence, so that you can get results within minutes. As a level test, this is a single test that can measures all the levels of proficiency. So it is one test that can be taken by a learner that is at an A level, and the same test would be able to measure proficiency of the C level, so that you don't have to make upfront decision about which level to assign to your learners. And it is a test that is available in two variants. So we have a level test free skills that is covering listening, reading, and writing. And then we have a level test that covers all the skills, including speaking. And as I said earlier, it's a quick, snappy test that can, depending on which variant you're using, doesn't last more than 30 minutes. And I think every test is really the uniqueness of every test really lies on the data that you get from the test, and and what you can do from that data. So let me show you some sample score reports. What I've got on screen here is the individual score report, which is describing proficiency for an individual student. What you see at the top here is a narrative description of a student's ability, worded in terms of what a student is able to do with the language. Uh, Given that this is a level test, what the test is measuring, what the test is giving you is an indication of the band or the level we believe your student is at. So this level is expressed either in a Cepher band, and we are taking into account also half bands. So you could be a B1 or a B1 plus, and it is also expressed with with the equivalent GSE band. Um, Relating to the Cepher band, as I said earlier. Um, and in the same score report, you also get details around every single skill. So for listening, for example, for every skill, you would get a little bit of a performance summary detailing what your student is able to do in relation to that skill. And you would also get an indication of whether the skill appears to be on par at the same level with the overall level, or whether it appears to be below or above the overall level. Because, like we said earlier, although you may have an overall proficiency of B1, for example, your listening may be stronger than your reading, and this is important information to have about your students, especially at the start of an education cycle. The last thing that I want to show you on the level test is a group score report, which, as the name says, gives you information about a specific set of students. It could be your class, or it could be all the students that you decided to put into that test session. And to me, the key feature of this test is also giving you a sense of distribution of the levels. So here, what I'm pointing to now is what we call a density map, which shows where the majority of students scored at. And then it will, in the bottom section, you'll be able to click on a specific level and see which students actually scored at that level, and you'll be able to pull out the detailed information about every single student. So this is the level test, which is, as I said, a test that we designed specifically thinking about the need of placing and streaming students. What I want to talk about next is the benchmark test, which we designed to really support teachers with monitoring students' progress and giving them an objective tool to monitor this progress. And again, similarly to what I did with the level test, I want to talk about some of the challenges that I heard and that we were set to provide a solution to with this test. So one of the challenge that I've heard without fail in every market I've visited and pretty much in every teacher, in every conversation I had with teachers, is that teachers often have to deal with mixed ability classes. So it is imperative that teachers understand students' strengths, individual students' strengths and weaknesses, so that they can plan the lesson according to what students and what your classes actually need. But I think being able to diagnose needs and monitor progress is also really critical when teachers have to reconcile with this reality of mixed ability, but also external pressure from your institution to be able to bring all the students to a minimum level of English. So again, a test like this can really help you set realistic expectations, not only for your students, but also for your academic supervisor or for the parents as well. Um, another thing that we think this test can really help you with is to provide learners with some visible progress. Like we said earlier, the GSE was designed to really show progress to students, even when it's not enough progress yet to move from one separate band to the next. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the importance of showing small steps of progress along the way, because that can really help keeping students engaged and motivated. Otherwise, we hear that students tend to lose motivation, and this is especially true of cases when learners reach that intermediate level, when we say the language learning kinds of plateau, and it takes a long time to really get out of the intermediate, to switch on from intermediate to an advanced level. And the last thing that we took into account when we designed this test was really to provide evidence of learners' progress to external stakeholders. So it could be parents in the case of young learners or teen, or it could be academic supervisors and so on. So all these considerations really brought us to the design of the benchmark test, which, like the level test, is a 4 skills test. But differently from the level test, its main mission is really to give you a very detailed analysis of learners' proficiency. And in fact, differently from the level test, this is a test that comes in 4 levels. It's not one single test. And we have a test for an A level, a B1, a B2, and a C level, so that you can really hone into students' abilities. It is a test, again, that is digital, that is powered by artificial intelligence, and that guarantees you results within minutes. But to me, the really standout feature of this test is that it lies in the richness of data, the very deep data that you can get from this test, which is not only around describing what your students are able to do with a language, but it also gives you a lot of recommendations for what to do next. And let me show you by looking at some sample score reports. So again, this is an individual score report, so a score report for a specific student where At the top, you see a narrative description of their ability. Different from the level test, in the benchmark test, we are giving a precise score along the GSE. And then we also give a visual representation of the individual skill breakdown. So you can see how each student has scored in every skill. And the individual scores are also mapped to the CEFR level as well, the Common European Framework level. As I mentioned at the beginning, the benchmark test is a test that is designed to be taken at multiple intervals in the either in an academic year or across 2 years, depending on how much instructions you're giving to your students. And if students have taken this test before, at the bottom here, might be small on your screen, you also see how this performance compares to the previous results, whether there's been a positive trend or hopefully not a negative trend. But let me come to what I think it's really the secret recipe of this test, which, as I said earlier, is around the richness of data. Another feature of the individual score report is to give you a detailed analysis of every single skill. So here we're looking at speaking, and we're looking at an individual score for speaking, paired with a bit of performance summary around the speaking abilities of the students. But the real secret sauce to me lies in the actionable steps. So what can you do in order to improve the performance of the students? So you would get recommended activities, generic activities that you can do with your students to remediate or consolidate on certain skills. But you also get suggested GSE learning objectives that teachers can plan to. So as a teacher, we always need to have an eye ahead and think about what to do next. And this is what the suggested GSE learning objectives give you, suggestions of what to do next. The other thing that you can do, if you're using Pearson courses, ELT courses, you can select the course that you're teaching, roadmap in this case. Could be Big English for younger learners or any Pearson title that you're familiar with. And you can choose the level you're teaching, and the system will automatically map and suggest you specific activities that you can do with your students based on their performance. But let me stress that this is an added feature in case you're happening to use Pearson courseware. You would still get actionable next steps in the form of recommended activities or GSE learning objectives. Even if you were to use your own material, or if you use another course from a competitor from Cambridge or Oxford, for example. And last, I want to show you an example of a group score report, which is, in the case of a benchmark test, really replicates the same level of information of the individual score report. So you would get a high level view, and also all the recommendations and mapped activities that I was showing you earlier. But this time the recommendations will be at class level. So as you're planning for your next cycle of teaching or for your next lesson, you are able to plan concurrently at individual needs level and at your class level. And hopefully this gives you very hopefully this helps you with the problems we were talking about earlier, which are, saving time in marking tests, of course, but also saving time in planning and really finding resources that are suitable to your students' needs. Okay, so that is the benchmark test, and I hope I've given you a taste of how this can help you to monitor students' progress. Now, in the last few minutes of this presentation, I do want to talk about a topic that I'm guessing it's relevant to many of you, and it is about what to do in the context of remote assessment, and when I don't have the students in front of me in my class. So, and let me say, this is a new topic for everyone. We've all been thrown into this situation, and what I want to show you, what I want to talk to you about, are some tips and advice that we have started to gather and collect this year. Um, and when I think about remote assessment or even digital assessment, I should say, I really like to think of it from three angles. And I'm using this framework of thinking about what is changing from a behavioral point of view. So, what is changing in the way that students are behaving, what is changing from an environmental point of view. So this has to do with the context and the scenario that students are in. And then I want to also throw in consideration about technical requirements. And let me tell you that these three angles are also the same things that this framework would be the same framework I would use if I were to give you advice on digital assessment in general, not in a remote context. I think what's changing in a remote context is really that the loss of control that you would normally have, because you don't, as I said, you don't have your students with you in the same class, and you don't have 15 people doing the same thing at the same time. So let me start with behavioral consideration. And I think really the key question where I've heard teachers grappling with, but let me tell you, even us as assessment developers are grappling with, is are the learners taking the assessment seriously? I said we are even asking ourselves these questions when we get requests to review um, student tests, because there seems to be something odd in the performance of one student. So, to me, the top advice here is to really spend time discussing the goals of the assessment with your students. And the reason why I say this is that both of the tests that I told you about today are really formative tests. They're not high stakes tests. They're not tests that will guarantee you or not entrance into the university. So it's really important that students understand this, and therefore they don't feel the pressure to cheat or take the test lightly. Because let's take the example of the placement test. If they were to cheat on a placement test, they'll end up in a much harder course that they can cope with, and this will be negative for their learning. In the end, at the end of the day. So I think there is a little bit of really making students responsible and making them aware of the purpose and the goals of your assessment. And then I've got another series of tips, which probably are the things that you would expect a bit more. So familiarize your students with the structure of the test. And by this, I mean, encourage them to take the sample test and to discuss all the different task types that make the test. Encourage them not to skip question, however tempting it could be. It's fine to skip questions if they don't know the answers, but it's always advisable to have a go. Like, don't have them skip questions just because they don't feel like it, basically, and remind them that each section is timed. When it comes to environmental consideration, the key question here for me is thinking about whether students have the right environment, because this is new. All of a sudden, the four walls of their room or their house has become their school. And this brings a consideration that could be obvious to an adult, but not to a 16-year-old. And that is that they have to negotiate with the people around them. The two key considerations here are around time and noise. So when it comes to time, is really making sure that students are considering whether they can be in a quiet room for the duration of the test and whether they can guarantee they won't be getting interruptions during the duration of the test. And this can be a challenge when you've got parents or a sibling around you. So, and to be fair to to students, this is a reality they have to deal with, and they need to learn about. The last consideration is around noise, because we learned that even a noisy fan or noisy heating can affect scores, especially when in the case of speaking tests, where a background noise can affect the quality of the audio capture that we record from the test. And last, let me close with technical consideration, which again comes down to whether or not students have the right equipment. And this is much easier to control when you are in a test center or in a school. You've got potentially a technical lead that can help you if there are issues. So it's important to encourage students to run an internet speed test, because having a reliable internet connection is really important in order not to have issues within the test. And for the same reason, we encourage best practice. For best practice, we always advise to close any background apps while you're taking the test. And the last technical consideration comes to is around the importance of having a reliable headset. So by reliable, I mean a headset that you've used before, that you know that you can get clear audio quality from. And for speaking tests, we advise you to use a headset like the one I'm wearing now with a boom microphone, because this guarantees an ideal distance between your mouth and the microphone. So that brings me to the close of this session, and I hope with this session I've given you a taste of 2 digital assessments that can help you at different stages of the teaching and learning cycle, and that could even help you in this context of remote teaching when you need to assess and deal with students from the distance. So I think we have a few minutes for questions now. So I will hand it over to Charlie for moderating the questions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ellie. Again, a superb session, as reflected with the comments that are coming in now and that they've already come in. I'll quickly field that question. Somebody's asking if they can review the webinar. Yes, recordings will be uploaded to the YouTube channel in the coming days. So please look out for that. A link to the YouTube channel will be sent to you after this session. So Ellie, questions for you. Where can I find the tests? I've posted a URL which is now pinned at the top of the chat box. And I think that's the best place for people to find the test. Is that correct?
Yes, and you can get a lot more information around this test, and you can also get in touch with a local rep that can, and we can arrange a demo for this as well. So as a first port of call, I really encourage you to go to the link that Charlie shared, and you will get a lot more information around the tests, these 2 tests that I've told you about.
Brilliant. So that link is pinned at the top of the chat box now. Pearson.com/English Catalog Assessment. Okay, so the next question. Is it necessary to work with books only from Pearson? or could the test be used with other course providers?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no need to be tied to Pearson to use these tests. And the reason why I'm saying this is that these tests are really designed to be course agnostic. They're designed to assess the learner's proficiency. And so this means that they're not just testing mastery of content that you've taught from a specific book, but they are meant to really assess the true proficiency of your learners. So you can use these tests using your own material. You can use them even if you are using a Pearson course and then you decide to switch to another course, you can do that. They would still work well and would really they would be looking at measuring the proficiency of your students irrespective of the specific course content that has been taught to them.
Brilliant, thanks for that. A quick one I'll take here, that can I find any materials by Pearson for teaching and learning legal English for university students? Here is a link to the Pearson English catalogue, now pinned at the top of the chat box. You can go there to find out about Pearson products. And the same, you go to that catalogue link or the assessment link to get samples. Great, so one more for you here, Ellie. Do the students take the tests online? How long are they?
Mm-hmm.
And do they sit all parts of the tests in one sitting?
Yes, they take the test online, and these two tests that I've told you about are designed to to have the best performance on laptops and browsers. How long they take, it depends on the test. The level test can be between 20 to 30 minutes, depending on whether you're choosing the free skill, in which case it's only 20 minutes. And if you're choosing the 4-skill test, then the test lasts 30 minutes. In the case of a benchmark test, that is a slightly longer test because it really hones into a specific level. So it is being designed to work it's designed to last 45 minutes, which was an estimate we took of the typical duration of a lesson. Was there anything else? I forgot the last point, Charlie.
The last point was whether it could be sat in one day. So I think you've actually.
Yeah, these are tests that are to be taken in one sitting. So you would be covering all the skills in one sitting, and they're not chunked up.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ellie. Unfortunately, we have now come to the end of the session. We've come to time, so we've got to move on to the next one. Thank you, Ellie, for putting that together. Another great session.
Thank you, everyone, for joining and being so active on chat. I wish you a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ellie. And thank you all to each and one of you for joining us. Certificates will be sent out. A recording will be loaded to YouTube in the coming days. And please, we hope to see you at more Pearson English webinars. Have a good rest of your day, wherever you are. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.